morning.
Good morning.
I'm Wendy Baker. I'm Director of Member Services and Events for FCPC. On behalf of our association, I'd like to welcome you all here today, especially on this wonderful sunny day that it will be. Thank you for joining us for this unique and insightful event brought to you by Active International. Active is a global leader in media with the foundation of corporate trade, helping businesses achieve more value through asset and media solutions. Active is a key partner in the CPG industry and has been an associate member of FCPC for over 9 years. As Canada's leading manufacturing industry, we contribute significantly to the country's economic growth. We believe that it's a privilege that Canadian consumers choose to buy what our members' products every day. FCPC exists to help our members deliver these safe and affordable products that enrich people's lives. A couple of housekeeping items just before we begin. For those of you looking to connect, the Wi-Fi code is on both sides around the room. The restrooms are located in the foyer near the elevator. Men's across the hall to the left, and women's just around the corner to the right. So to begin, today's interactive panel discussion will provide you with actionable insights to apply to your campaigns as we discuss how the media plans of tomorrow will be driven by data. Moderating the panel discussion is Ahmed Al-Waili, Director of Programmatic Data and Insights at Active International. Please welcome Ahmed, who will introduce each of the panelists.
Hello, and thank you all for being here today. Firstly, I want to thank Wendy and the FCPC for having us here for this great event. I wasn't going to get into introducing myself, but I guess that's already done. So, just so everybody knows, we usually host these Media 360 events once a quarter, and essentially the purpose of it is just to demystify some of the trending topics that's going on in the industry, and we invite subject matter experts to discuss. All the questions that we're asking today are all given by you guys. So before, when you guys were confirming attendance, you were asked if you want to ask any questions, and what all the questions, like I said, is all from our audience. So if you want, we want this to be as personal as possible and as engaging, and we want everybody involved. So if you have questions during the panel, feel free to ask, or you can save your questions towards the end where we're gonna have a Q&A. And if you're just shy or don't want to talk, you could even tweet your questions using hashtag Media360, and then afterwards we will address those questions at the end as well. Now, who's ready to get started? All right, today our panel is going to be discussing data-driven media planning. As our industry continues to evolve with heavy focus on data, we've seen the emergence of new divisions focused on data analytics and data scientists who are joining the ranks of both agency and client side. We're also seeing data play a bigger role in shaping media decisions, even on traditional channels like TV. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We'll start from our left and we'll move all the way to the right.
Hi, I'm Therese Brisson. I lead the marketing and sales strategy function in Canada at Kimberly Clark, and I've been with the company about 5 years. Before that, I was about 10 years leading different businesses at P&G all in Canada.
Hi, I'm Glenn Martin. I'm the head of marketing for Scotts Canada. Been there about 16 years, worked in various industries, was with Cadbury for a number of years, much more popular with my friends and kids when I was a candy man than the pesticide grass and seed guy. And worked in other industries, automotive and hardware as well.
So my name is Ken Davey. I'm the manager of programmatic and data ad solutions at Rogers. In my role, I am responsible for managing our team of programmatic sales experts who are here today. Shout out to the team. With the advancements and sort of blending of data and programmatic, our team quickly became also the data subject matter experts across the entire media organization. That's what I do.
I'm Jason Calan, the VP Sales at MIT Canada. Been with the organization for about 2 years now. Before that, heading up programmatic solutions at Yahoo, Brightroll, and Verizon Media. I'll give a fun fact because why not? Therese is actually a bit of an Olympian, for those who didn't know. And I'm the owner of 3 puppies back home, so.
We'll share.
I'm Brian Wiley. I'm with Connected Interactive, the Chief Operating Officer. I do sales, operations, partnerships, finance, probably just about everything within the organization. Been there from the beginning, been around for about 9 years now. And before that, spent close to 20 years in ad agencies, media companies, doing media planning and buying, which is not something that I miss entirely, but I'm glad we're here talking about it today.
Lovely.
That's a heck of a kickoff.
And just to add on to that, Therese is actually 7 gold medals and 1 silver. Is that correct? Yeah. At the Olympics, so. Okay, let's get started. So our first topic is going to be an intro to data and data-driven planning. So based on your experience, what are the most effective sources of customer data?
I'll get us started. Who's in the room? Do we have CPG client side? How many are you client side? How many agency? Vendors? Yeah, so but kind of equal. This is a relevant question because what data is most effective really depends on what your objectives are and who your audience is. And so with that in mind, when you think about companies like ours, Kimberly-Clark's a global company with many billion-dollar, it's an $18 billion company with many billion-dollar brands trying to reach consumers to make their lives better every day. Penetration and reach really matter for our business. And so, what data is important for us is certainly, yes, it's our first party data, but there are many second and third party data providers that we partner with all the time. In order to reach our objectives, which certainly are around upper funnel objectives, if you will, as well as sort of lower funnel and driving data acquisition and driving right down to sales. And so, depending on what your objective is and who your audience is, and that's the other thing about some of our categories is they're not niche. Baby care, it's not small, but it's 10% penetrated. Adult care business. Again, not a small category, and it's growing rapidly, but about 10% penetrated. So we're always trying to reach these consumers that, are big groups, but they really are a focused target. And so depending on what your audience is and business objective really drives what's the best data for you. And so we're finding all kinds of second and third party data sources that complement our first data.
I think we were just talking about it in the room as well. Media channel is also indicative of what is a valuable inventory. Or sorry, what were we talking about again? Oh my gosh, a research source or data source, yeah, puppies. So we were talking about it in the back room, just the fact that digital has always been considered this lower funnel activity kind of source for information, and more often traditional broadcast, out of home have been considered those upper funnel activity pieces. But we're finding now that the data is allowing us to have the opportunity to converse with brands like yourselves or agencies and talk about the importance of digital within that entire funnel. So no longer are we like the dirty little secret lower funnel activity, just utilizing data to drive that final acquisition home. It's being pushed a little bit more, and I think there was a study by Adidas that said, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah.
So the Adidas study was it's a pretty good example of investing heavily into the low funnel. Just taking all those digital dollars, putting it all into one area, and really hoping it's going to work. They had probably reasons and objectives and rationale for that. In the end, it didn't work out, and it just proves that the investment probably didn't have the right rationalizing data to associate to be all low funnel. Digital is not low funnel as a primary source. It's a great opportunity for all parts of the funnel, and data should be used to drive and figure out which part that you're going to play.
So how do you guys feel data can be leveraged to inform media buying?
So I'll take this one. So for us, there's really kind of three primary ways which we're working with marketers to help activate our data. So the first one is more of a bit of a consultative approach. So this is a little bit about kind of campaign pre-planning. So working with marketers and clients to understand, if you have a profiled audience or who that audience is, and using our kind of likewise signals at Rogers in order to help build that audience out for you. Or it can also take the form of, perhaps data matching or CRM matching, that sort of approach as well. So this is kind of pre-campaign stuff when we're able to identify, what that audience actually looks like, what their platform affinities are, what they do, what they like across Rogers Media properties. Are they cable households? Are they wireless customers? So all those sort of different data signals help us inform kind of pre-campaign plan. The next would be activation. So this is stuff that we're already pretty much, is commonplace. It's pretty much table stakes now, especially on digital platforms. So this is where, we're in fully addressable environments. We know how to actually find those audiences across digital properties, whether it's video, display, even audio. And our group is kind of unique as well because we were able to use our data sets for linear television activation as well. And then probably the third one is a bit of a post-campaign function of data as well. So actually looking at the results of the campaign, what messaging was effective, and really educating and informing what could be the kind of future campaign strategy and how we fine tune. So we kind of think of it in a bit of a wheel. It's a bit of a cycle where you can really pick up data activation across any one of those kind of three quadrants.
I'll just sort of tie into that. I mean, our business is going through some pretty significant shifts. Obviously, you look downtown and everything's a building, there's not a lot of lawns, not a lot of gardens. So we've had a radical shift in terms of who our consumers, and we've had years of really knowing how to talk to our guys who look like me who live in the suburbs. We're pretty good at that. It's this whole new generation of people who are getting into the category that different needs and wants, and we've relied heavily on our agency partners to really help us, particularly the digital speed, in order to, as you said, find those audiences and really go after them in a much different way than we have in the past. And I think that's been sort of key for us, is to create those consumer groups that again we typically haven't gone after, and really learn from some of the data that we've been able to get from first and second media partners, because there's a lot of other categories that now that we are going to be sort of, I'll say, emulating that we've never participated in, and it's been quite helpful in really sort of changing our way of going to market with that.
I think what a lot of really good tech companies are doing right now is beginning to connect like a lot of that siloed data. So previously, you used like Numeris for TV data, first party for digital executions. What you're seeing is that the best tech companies in the world are now beginning to kind of blur those lines, and marketers themselves are beginning to ask questions about how to begin to blur those lines, connect those disparate data sources to tell a really succinct story as to like who your customer actually is. Because a lot of it, activation, or execution is being done on television, but like you've got a media mix. Most of you operate outside of just that one channel, so understanding how you're going to utilize that data across the entire landscape. Companies like Rogers is doing that with Red. You look at me, and you guys are starting. But there are really, really good tech companies, and I think at MIT specifically, this is why about half of our global staff are actually data scientists, analysts, and engineers. Is we don't have a big sales staff. We actually have people who can make sense of connecting that data, and then providing insights that are actually impacting marketers.
So with that, what do you guys think is the biggest challenge or obstacle or roadblock for data-driven planning? I'd like to get perspective from the client as well as from one of the vendors.
Yeah, I think the two things that stick with me, and I'll talk about those two things and maybe the three things we're doing about it, if that's helpful. The first is getting to unduplicated reach and making sure that we're not talking to the same consumer over and over again, just in different channels. I think is a nice way to talk about it. The second one is the lack of robust global purchase data, a la, sort of Nielsen, Catalina type thing. There's all kinds of different little bits and bobs you can work with, but the lack of a global data source is really challenging. So what are we doing about it? I think there's three main shifts that we've made. The first is what I'll call a shift to audience first planning, and so really being very clear about what audience we're trying to reach and building out those rich audiences with some of the technology we've implemented so that we can reach those consumers. The second is around our media planning. What we're focused on is making sure that we're planning for media sufficiency, in other words, the reach and frequency to be sufficient to deliver our business objectives, while planning at all the stages of the funnel, setting goals and objectives by stage and establishing KPIs against them. The third thing that we're doing is really, I'll call it real-time analytics and insights, because we set those KPIs at different stages in the channel, but we're actually evaluating daily against those and intervening and making changes along the way, which, before we would do that, run MMMs, and then next year make a difference, make a change 5 years ago. So those are the three things that we're doing to try to solve for some of these challenges. I think one of the unintended consequences of some of the challenges with this unduplicated reach is, in the walled gardens and everything else, is that you tend to focus on, okay, what are the fewest channels I can work with in order to get the reach and frequency I need, as well as, meet some of these key KPIs, depending on what your business objectives are.
I totally agree. I think that one of the biggest challenges as a vendor perspective is that there's so much data available. There are so many options. There are so many choices. There are so many pieces of technology to facilitate data in and out. Glenn used the word 3 times, partner. And I think partner is probably the biggest solution to do that. That partner is going to be somebody who's going to help you figure it out, navigate the ecosystem, somebody you can trust, and somebody that you can work with and share on the success and share on the failure, and be able to learn for those kinds of things and be able to move forward and learn and improve as you go along. Because there's a ton of technology, it can get confusing and extremely overwhelming. But there are people who can help guide in the right direction.
Say just more generally, from a resourcing perspective, you actually need people who are dedicated to this function within a lot of these organizations. Even at some of our partners, which are the kind of biggest holding companies in the world for media, we have a client who they have 8 data scientists to service, a roster of, over 80 different clients. So, that really stretches people thin, and I think in the data space as well, it really takes this different approach where, I often find myself kind of, some days frustratingly, asking the same sort of 2 questions, and that really is, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and how do you want us to be measured, which I think everyone's kind of touched on here. So again, you need that partnership, and you kind of need that dedicated resource on the other end of the client side to really kind of hold everyone's hand around some of these bigger questions.
Just wanted to add in, one of the, I think we're pretty aligned with the challenges that you mentioned. One of the things that we've got that we are heavily dependent upon, real-time data to make decisions and changing, which has been a big change for us. Being a seasonal business, I've got 12 weeks in which and even less depending on the weather. I mean, sometimes it's worse, and we refer to sort of the May long weekend as our Christmas, and we can do upwards of about 70% of our total year's business by the end of that weekend. So you start getting into data choices, in the past where we would build a plan, you'd run the ads, you'd cross your fingers, pray to whatever you need to believe in that the weather's going to, go along with you, and then, analyze at the end of the season. I think with a lot of the new media types and the data that can sort of show performance in real time, you know, it's helped us to be able to course correct when we can still have an impact on the business. Because once the season is done, it's done. So I think that's key. And I do use the word partner because we are very, I'll say, we talked about it outside, we're a data poor company with really rich brands and don't have the internal infrastructure to really support a lot of the analytics that need to go on. And so we do rely heavily on the sort of category experts, and there has to be obviously a level of trust that you develop with them to hold their hands and you know, act upon that type of information that they're providing for you. But yeah, the ability to get someone who can provide simple. I mean, again, we've got, you know, marketers. We're not like the pretty pictures. We're not necessarily great with the analytics. So the simplification of that data in terms of actionable items is you know, what we push back on any of our partners that work with. You know, what does it mean to us, and what are we going to do about it?
So it feels like the theme here is trust, working with your partners and whatnot. Now, do you guys feel like there's a hesitation to share your first party data with your agencies or your vendor marketplace?
Alan's staring at me. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this earlier, and you know, we have a legislative and regulatory environment of how consumers opt in, and they have expectations of us. So of course we don't share first-party data. But what we do share, of course, is what are the outcomes of our media investment in terms of results, so that whether that be the agencies we're working with or the partners, we do share that data so that we can optimize and improve along the way. And I think we'd be foolish not to, and we're all best served to be able to leverage the same data, be looking at the same dashboards so that we can make decisions together along the way. And so that certainly is something we do, and I think everyone should be doing.
And are you guys providing that like in real time or after the campaign or?
In real time. So, you know, we have created analytics dashboard that allow, you know, Tableau is the visualization tool with enabled by a data mart so that we can all look at the same data at the same time, and anyone on the team and our agency partners can look at that, and we discuss weekly what the learnings are from there so that we can adjust along the way. And so I think that's something 3 years ago we were like sending Excel sheets back and forth, if you can believe that, and that is just not sustainable, practical, fast enough. So you know, we've purposely and deliberately established mechanisms of sharing learning so that we can take those insights and optimize quickly.
And Glenn, with your brand, you work a lot with retailers. Do you find that it's challenging getting data from the retailers?
Yeah, it's definitely been a big challenge. It's one in which, I mean, they are definitely protective of their data, you know, in fears of it reaching one of their competitors. And I think we've done a really good job, I'd say, even in the last 6 months, in terms of what we've been able to bring to the table. And you know, sort of the kimono is sort of being opened up a little bit from our retailer perspective, seeing the value of partnering with, you know, we are the, I'll call it the milk and eggs of you know, our channel. So they desperately need us to drive volume. So we are starting, and we're just, I'll say it's early stages, but starting to be able to link our data and their data and really develop a stronger sort of attribution model. But it's going very slowly. I mean, I'll give you, you know, even in the simplest terms, we have no AC Nielsen market data for our industry at all. None of the retailers will share their information with ACN, even in the simplest terms. So they're doing a lot of things internally, and again, it's a slow process, and it's, you know, there's obviously, as I talk about trust with our agencies, there's trust with our retailer partners with us to be able to you know, link our data and develop programs, you know, based on our learnings and their learnings that are going to drive more. And we're starting to see it. I mean, we're doing joint advertising, We are doing, regionalized promotions based on, our sales data and their data combined. So, not where I want it to be, but definitely, I'd say we're making some progress, and people are starting to recognize what the value of that is, and again, with that trust comes better results.
And how do you guys feel like you're connecting the pieces on like missing or incomplete data sets? Like for example, I don't know, like sales attribution.
Well, I mean, I'll say, as I mentioned, we're sort of a data poor organization or big data poor industry. For us, it is a balance of science and art. So taking the pieces that we do have, I mean, I've got a number of agency partners that have got tremendous modeling capabilities, and they'll come to me and I need A, B, and C, and I can give them D and E. So there is some extrapolation that, with the experience of the brand team that we've got to make some assumptions and combine that with what we, hard data facts that we do have in order to run some of these models. But yeah, it's definitely, there is no, you do have to sort of, take a bit of a leap of faith combined with what you can actually measure in order to get to the answers.
Yeah, I think we're in a bit better situation in the consumer product brands that we have, where certainly there is that lack of the global sort of purchase data, whether that be through receipts or whatever else. But of course, we've got the Nielsen data, which does a really great job of we call the scan channels, grocery, mass, discount, drug. We have home scan data, the club channel, and then of course we have in some of our e-commerce channels, the retail data, Amazon, Brandon Pro, that kind of thing. So I think we do a really nice job as part of our annual sort of MMM. We get a really good read on effectiveness of different tactics at a global level on an annual basis. It really does become an exercise in, okay, if we want to understand what's happening in a particular channel, we would work with that data that we have for the channel to get a good sense of the effectiveness of our media in that channel.
I think for us, when we've had and been able to work with clients that have been able to pass back their sales data to us, those are some of our most compelling use cases for actually stitching together the effectiveness of multi-platform executions. So some of the stuff that we've done is try to kind of demystify it and take some of the stress and the anxiety out of the kind of data sharing process. So we've created client kind of friendly documents, frequently asked questions, so that people actually understand how we're using data, what can be seen on either side. Again, it kind of goes back to this like trust notion. People need to kind of trust that we are going to be responsible holders of data, and also understanding that it's not personally identifiable. So we want to keep everything obviously above board. And the other thing is working with some exchange partners and tech providers that are able to facilitate the transfer through a third party, so that the client or ourselves are never really in possession of any data per se. So just kind of two approaches in that vein.
You just need to start being honest, I think, like as vendors from this side and that side over. It's just understanding like why we're asking for data and like what the output of that is. So if you look at companies like LCL, who I don't believe are in the room right now, but there are some CPG brands as far as I'm aware. Like that, they've built a foundation of a business, understanding that they've got really rich data capabilities with those in-store sales, and they're now selling that back to marketers, which is great. You're paying through the teeth for it, by the way. But it's really, really valuable stuff. So I think what you're going to see is the advent of more organizations be a little bit more open and honest with how they're collecting data and how potentially you can utilize it.
And how do you guys feel data has changed in the last 5 years? Like, what do you guys feel is the impact, and how is it being used? How are brands optimizing for it, or preparing for it, or planning for it? And how much has it evolved in the last 5 years?
Good data is hard to find. So probably in the past where you could get access to all kinds of channels of third-party data sources that were transparent, reliable, Canadian, were prevalent. And I think it became, one of the problems in the usage of all of that type of data that has created a push out to data in places where you can't pick it out. So, I know the big guys that are out there in the digital space that, they'll take all your data in, but they won't give you anything back. Right? So, everybody needs to be able to learn in order to be successful. If we're a vendor and we're working for a client, we need to be able to pass those results and that information and those success factors back across. In a lot of cases, we're going to get cut off in a lot of channels there that make it difficult to do.
It's only going to get harder. Now there are even more restrictions being put in place. They're talking about CCPA, ITP 2.0. It's going to be really, really difficult to begin to collect that data. So making sure that you're scrutinizing the data that you do have access to and utilizing it as best as humanly possible is going to become more and more valuable for brands, because it's going to become a lot less frequent. Like Brian was just saying, there used to be a ton of it. It was just kind of sifting through to find the quality stuff. Now there's going to be a lot less of it. The quality stuff should begin to bubble to the top, but it's really just identifying like what's worth it to you and your brand.
So, do you guys feel like there's influence or best practice that have been pushed from the U.S.? So I know a lot of us have our parent companies in the U.S. and they might be using data in a different way. Do you guys feel like one, legislation is holding us back, or maybe technology? How have you guys been working with the U.S. counterparts, and have you been utilizing any of the best practices, or has there been barriers?
So I think for us, we, obviously we're kind of Canadian through and through, but we obviously work with a lot of the U.S. Counterparts when it comes to technology infrastructure. So I think that's one of the areas and kind of more places where we see opportunity to work with them is sort of working with their platforms to kind of enable what this fully addressable world is going to look like. So obviously that involves things like IP-based television, and one of the kind of more newer opportunities that we work with in the U.S. was with Xandr to enable programmatic trading of some of our live sports inventory. So all that I see is sort of like a mix to sort of help enhance what the kind of future state will be.
Yeah, I was just going to say we've been a pretty interesting case study at Kimberly-Clark. 5 years ago, or prior to 2014, the company was largely just a sales organization in Canada. We made a major transformative shift. Sales organization with low, slow growth. And we thought we could be doing a lot better in Canada if we really built an organization designed to win with the Canadian consumer and customer. And so we built business units, took back ownership of the P&L so that we had the autonomy to make decisions that could accelerate growth in our market, which we thought there was lots of potential. And since we've done that, it's we've had 3.5 times the growth the last 5 years that we had prior. One of the reasons is because we've embarked on a project of what I call a lot of localization, frankly. And taking some of the stuff from the U.S., sure, we still adapt when we can, but because of the different legislative environment and this availability of purchase data, what we found is just taking from the U.S. and putting in Canada hasn't been very effective. We had a trading desk in Chicago that I think it was the lowest ROI vehicle we had. If you could believe this, our search function and the team, buying search was out of the U.S. And so we've localized our search here in Canada and have doubled our ROI. We built our own trading desk here in Canada, and we weren't even getting the bulk discounts we were, entitled to, I guess. God help us for the French market, we just could not do it. And so we've localized that. We transitioned our CRM database locally so that we could actually talk to consumers along their longer consumer journey, which crosses a lot of our brands, whereas in the US, those CRM databases were built in silos by brand. And so there's lots of things that we've been doing, and it really is this theme of localization in order to create create the right experiences for the consumer, the Canadian consumer, so we can win with that consumer. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the data; it's about the experience you create for the consumer. I think the last thing we did that was really important and has actually been reapplied in a lot of other countries globally is we built local partnerships, and some of the guys were talking earlier about partnership. We built local joint business partnerships with these digital media players, Facebook Canada, Amazon Advertising Canada, Google in Canada. We built those partnerships locally along creative excellence, media excellence, analytics and insights, information sharing, and those partnerships actually, one of them has been reapplied globally as a bit of a best practice because we can move a little faster here in Canada on some of those things. So it's been a theme for us of localization actually versus just take and put from the US market. Of course, we learn from what they do, but we have to adapt in order to create the right experience for consumers here in Canada.
U.S. influence has been part of my entire career, working in media and advertising. It's always there for agency side, publisher side, client side, and vendor side. Today, I just kind of mentioned it, third-party data is heavily influenced by U.S. data. Technology is heavily influenced by U.S. data. When you take a look at some of the major enterprise data management platform companies that'll set up shop in Toronto and put a token person in there, and their customer service is abysmal. I think that we're seeing as well a lot of U.S. companies that operate in Canada from a media supplier perspective that don't comply with Canadian standards. They don't use Canadian data, but they're not open about it. But maybe they're a little bit cheaper, where they take a model that's been done in the U.S. and try to apply it here. It's the stuff that everybody needs to spend time vetting that, making sure you're not getting on board with any of that, but finding out what's right for you from all of those perspectives. But U.S. influence is a major part of what we're doing here.
I think I concur with pretty well everything you said. With our model is very similar. We didn't sort of go through the process of localizing. We've been lucky enough to sort of have that autonomy sort of since I've been with the organization, and we've consistently delivered better results than the U.S. But I think the things that are really have impacted, as you said, technology, where we are in Canada versus the U.S. has led us not to be able to necessarily follow what our U.S. counterparts are doing. Language, culture, and that the relationships is exactly the same with us at Scott's. The relationship we've been able to develop with local media partners and suppliers that we've had someone out of Boston or someone out of Chicago picking up the phone is not going to be able to have that sort of daily sort of relationship to be able to bring those opportunities to us as a vendor. I mean, clearly we look to the U.S. I think as the Canadian marketplace evolves, particularly from a technology standpoint, I think that's when we'll see ourselves leveraging, when we sort of catch up to where they're at. Because we've got a lot of people that are doing a lot of really cool things in our U.S. organizations. We've also been looked at as a test and learn opportunity for the U.S. The risk of failure in Canada to a multinational is pretty low relative to their home market. So, we are trying some things in Canada that they are looking at and saying, okay, can we then roll it out regionally or whatever the U.S., which is not often things go north to south. So but they're starting to see the value in that, and that's only because of us having those established partnerships within the local market and working with people that understand the local market.
I want to talk quickly about broadcast. So, does everybody know the difference between programmatic TV and addressable TV? Okay, not everybody.
There's
at
a
once.
quiz.
Don't all shoot all at
I'll
once.
say no in case someone doesn't want to say no.
Okay, so essentially programmatic TV, it's one-to-many. So essentially what that means is you're using your set-top box to identify data and to identify your audience. However, you're showing your ad to everybody that's watching that show. Whereas addressable TV, it's one-to-one. So my neighbor and I could be watching the same show, however, based on our interests and our behavior and whatnot, they might see a different ad than I would. So that's, and based on that, how do you guys think broadcast is adapting to the new data world? Yeah,
You're staring at me.
broadcast.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I answered this one. So, obviously, Ignite is the kind of big bet for laying the foundation for the kind of fully addressable TV world. And there's a pretty impressive effort by Rogers to convert all of the households that are currently on our legacy systems. There's about 1.6 million of them. So that's kind of a big effort that's underway already. But I think our approach is a little bit of a crawl, walk, run. So, the crawl has been to introduce data into the linear TV kind of scheduling process. So this is where, we understand that as a marketer, you still want to reach a broad demo of, say, adults 25-54, but you may particularly be in market for moms. So what we're actually able to do is understand who our moms are and overlay them over top of who the Rogers cable customer base is, and then look in aggregate at that group and understand what their viewing patterns are and make schedule recommendations using that data set. So what time of day are they most likely to be tuned in, what programming, what days of the week, all that kind of stuff kind of factors into how we make those recommendations. I think it's called Walk. So the Walk version is going to be, for some reason I say putting them up in my head. So Walk is obviously, actually injecting dynamically inserted ads into the Ignite experience. So we are lucky that we have a test partner called Rogers the Advertiser that we're actually able to tap for a lot of this testing. So that's already underway where we're inserting ads using targeting at a postal code or a segment level into the catch-up viewing or video on demand experience. And then, once that reaches maturity, likely in the next kind of 4 or 5 years, maybe sooner, let's hope, then we'll be running. And I think the run experience is when we have a fully addressable market for consumers, that's great for them. They can watch content across any screen whenever they want, and for marketers, you're able to understand what the impact of that execution is across all screens, all devices, no matter what. So that's where we're going.
And I think we need to touch on the fact as well that there are multiple streaming services that are now available, specifically in the Canadian market. The way that broadcast is being consumed is very different now. So some of you may have heard that Samsung ads are now setting up shop here in Canada. There's Roku, who's specifically here in Canada. So understanding the way that your audience is actually consuming that, where there's definitely a place for the Rogers, the Bells, the Courses of the world, understanding that it's a bit more fragmented than it used to be. And you can look to the US for some learning and insight. I'm not saying that we have to mimic, based off the last topic, what they've been doing down there, but they've definitely got a bit of a head start when it comes to the addressable or programmatic television. And the way that they're kind of navigating that streaming space right now, and understanding that some of your audiences may be the cord never words. And that's a weird word, but there are people who just never traditionally set up broadcast the way that it's been historically done, and understanding the way that you're going to interact with them. Rogers still has a place now because they've got really rich mobile data, but it may not be in the traditional broadcast sense.
And what are you guys doing as a source of validation? To validate everything that you guys are talking about, essentially.
Yeah, so for us, it goes back to, this is gonna drift into like ad tech nerd stuff, but creating our own identity graph. So giving a holistic view to a marketer of who that individual is across whether it's desktop, mobile, OTT, CTV, all that kind of stuff. We're big proponents of data transparency and what goes into creating our segmentation. And obviously we have customers, they're real humans, they're real Canadians. So from that point of kind of validation, we can stand up and say these are actual real people. And I think in the kind of addressable world, that's going to be even more and more valuable.
How close do you think we are to addressable TV here?
Well, it's here. it's just like a little baby still, but,
Still walking or crawling?
We
No.
need you guys to start running
Yeah.
from a client side.
I would say we're looking at like 3 to 5 years. 2023, but don't quote me.
We have you on tape, by the way.
Let's set that.
All right, this was a big topic. We got a lot of questions around this next topic about cookies. And they are delicious, but we're talking about the online cookies. So cookies are a huge factor in how we find our audience in the programmatic space. With more and more pressure from consumer privacy, governments are doubling down on regulations that block third-party technology that targets consumers. Like, for example, GDPR, ITP, TP, OPP, yeah, you know me. This has resulted in platforms like Apple, Firefox, and more recently Google. And just so you guys know, Chrome is responsible for approximately 63% of the market share. So it's a big deal. Also jumping on the bandwagon by developing software to block third-party cookies on their browsers. So with that said, like, what happens when cookies disappear? And what does a world without cookies look like?
Yeah, I don't think we're very far away from that, actually. And it's not just about cookies, it's about consumer behavior as well. They're choosing to look at channels that, I mean, when you ask a consumer under 35 today, what do they watch for TV? They're talking about what they looked at on the TV, which is Netflix and Google, YouTube, and so they're already moving away from channels that have advertising. They're subscribing, they're suppressing, and we've got the legislative dynamic as well, and concerns over privacy. So all of those factors has led us to really think about, getting our foundation right. And by our foundation, it really is our first party data, making sure we're winning in social, where consumers already engaged in those conversations. It's making sure we're winning in search, where we already have people who are raising their hand interested in our categories. It's about ratings and reviews and making sure we're winning there. That's what I mean when I talk about the foundation, making sure we're winning on the foundation. Then it's about showing up in those contextual spaces, and just to use the baby care example, Baby Center, Parents.com, we need to be there. And then it's about thinking about our mass reach and audience tools in order to make sure that we have the sufficient reach and frequency. So those are some of the things I think we all should be doing to prepare for this world, and it's certainly something we're doing.
To that point, Therese, like, I think it's what's old is new again. So most of us have probably been in the business for more than 10 years. You used to buy digital and like content, right? And we're seeing that kind of resurgence. We work in the programmatic space, but what we've been doing pretty aggressively now is just like doing A/B testing within campaigns with some of our partners to begin to understand the impact or influence that content has on what they deem KPIs and what the traditional programmatic kind of trending towards KPIs. What we're finding is, surprise, surprise, content actually does drive a lot of that. So what you're going to see is there's going to be a bit of a step back in terms of the way that we begin to talk about targeting. And it's going to feel familiar, but it's going to be done in a completely different way and manner going forward. But I think that that's kind of an exciting time. Is like marketers can use this to be a little bit, cheeky with ads again. It's not just driving towards clicks and completion rates anymore, which are antiquated KPIs as far as I'm concerned. It's a little bit more about like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to innovate. We're trying to sell more stuff. We're trying to move more soil or fertilizer or baby food. Like, that's what we need to be kind of looking at, and whatever drives that. It may not be some third-party data set from the US. It may be the data that you have. You're gonna hear a lot more about zero-party data, but like kind of staying top of mind with your consumer. It's gonna go right back to, I think at least, the content space.
If I could just maybe build on that, and the work that we've been doing was really probably a realization 5 years ago, when we realized that to create a consumer experience, you have to have a direct relationship with the consumer. And we realized everybody had a direct relationship with our consumers except for us. And so that was really a rallying cry for us, and that's a little bit why we got to where we got to. And I think it's a really great question to ask yourselves: who has that direct relationship with the consumer? And if it's everybody but you, I think you need to do something about it.
We've been working with cookie-free data for 3 years. We got the opportunity to partner with MasterCard 3 years ago, which in Canada you cannot target a credit card holder on a one-to-one basis. And that actually goes back to something that drives me crazy, is third-party data you can find that says it's MasterCard, Amex, and Visa card holders in these ecosystems, and it's actually illegal to hold that in the ecosystem, but it's there anyway. But I already talked about that. The cookie-free data is based on proximity. So if MasterCard identifies an area where there's a high propensity of card holders that perform a certain retail function. So we treat it more like a flyering strategy in that way. We've changed the way that some of our clients are thinking about prospecting. It becomes a new prospecting engine, and then the back end takes over for the retargeting and cookie generation and building up first-party data sets. So now that model for MasterCard turned out to be a testing ground for how that they're going to deal with their own issues in the States as they start to evolve and think about how they can build out audiences against Zip4, Zip9 data, the way that we've done here in Canada for them. So it was terrifying at first. We had no idea what we would get in terms of results, but it's been a successful partnership and it's continuing to evolve. So cookie-free world is nothing to beat right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, similar to you spoke with your social channels and search and reviews where you've got full control. I mean, we have the benefit in our category. It's very easy to sort of contextually target lawn and garden, and I think that allows us, in a world without cookies, opportunities, with that content, very content specific, to be able to use those channels, because people are searching it out. Lawn and garden, interesting, is like one of the highest search topics on Amazon, even though Amazon's not a major player in that category. So again, we have the benefit of people actively searching that category. We need just to find ways to be able to latch on to those vehicles where people are looking for that data, and serve up the relevant content.
Yeah, to echo some of this, I think it's just a swing back to people-based marketing, understanding and having unique identifiers on the people who you actually want to speak to. We're already doing some tests around identity-based buying, so there's already some solutions in market whereby you're able to upload your CRM lists, you're able to transact on them programmatically, and essentially we're matching to the database of our consumers and only surfacing inventory when there's actually a match made on the page level. So I think it's already here, but obviously there are factors to consider as well. Match rates can sometimes not be super awesome, depending on how good your data sets are and also the kind of provider in the middle that's helping make the match. And I think also it's a bit of just like being realistic about what this kind of future is going to hold. Scale decreases, obviously. The cost of those impressions to reach those people who you know for sure to be your customers might go up, but overall that I think has a beneficial effect on the ecosystem. It kind of cleans it up and takes out some of the third-party and slushy data that's kind of cheap and readily available out there.
Okay, so now knowing all this, how should we plan for the future of eLife?
Just run away.
Just kidding. I think it's kind of what we talked about in the beginning, is what are the ways to formulate and figure out and find some of the best data, and that's going to be through really core partnerships that are trustworthy and transparent and really provide value.
I mean, it's just embrace the change and be willing to take a little bit of risk. It's a space that we're all kind of navigating together right now. Having communication like this is imperative in all of us being successful going forward. I think that just having that willingness to change a little bit is really going to be ideal.
I think for us, it's really helping kind of shine a light on this kind of like work, live, play that is basically everyone in this room. You're not just you work wherever you do and you're here today, you do a million other things. And I know there's obviously a place still for panel-based data and your own first-party data, and it can be augmented with all the insights and stuff that your media activation can provide. So I think it's ultimately figuring out how you're going to use all those in a kind of harmonious way in order to plan and execute going forward.
I think it's really solidifying the core of your business. You're protecting that. You can't make radical changes on what you're doing overnight, but I think taking risks, taking a portion of your budget, trying something different, pushing your partners to sort of come to you with innovation, not just for the sake of innovation and shiny, but every year trying to find something that you can test and learn with, and then bring that back the following season, following year, if you had success, and start morphing your plans and the way you do things, as the ecosystem evolves.
Yeah, I'll talk, we talked a little bit about sort of the get your foundation right and some of the three things that we've been doing around sufficiency, KPIs within the funnel, audience first, and real-time planning optimization. But if I take a step back, I think the really important thing is my advice would be, and certainly we're doing this, is be prepared to invest in this, and not just a sort of test and learn. So those are really important. 75% of your budget's this, 25 is that. I think over the next 3 to 4 years, I'd really advise everyone to really be thinking and not be afraid of those non-working costs, investing in the technology, the IT, but before any of that, the people who can help, and the processes that will actually unleash the full potential of it. And I think we're all going to have to be prepared to invest and find the fuel to invest in this in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay, one final question, we'll wrap it up. For the vendors, what do you guys feel is the biggest missed opportunity out there that brands should be taking advantage of? And for the brands, what do you guys feel is something that you would like the vendors to have, maybe a missed opportunity for them that they're not taking advantage?
Which one of the vendors wants to go first? All right, I'll kick off with it. I think I'm going to reiterate my last point. We work quite consistently with D2C brands. D2C brands who have been born in the internet are really kind of changing the landscape for traditional marketers. I was at a large CPG kind of marketing offsite last week and got to speak in front of them, and they asked me the same question. I told them learn from people who aren't afraid to fail. The D2C brands, if you look at the mattresses, for example, of Casper and Envy, folks like that, data rich and really begin to understand their consumers. They haven't been afraid to fail. They're opening pop-up shops because they know that they've got a consumer base that needs to touch and feel a mattress, and sometimes they're closing them just because it doesn't make sense for them. But what they've done is they've essentially invested heavily in exactly what Teresa's talking about, that infrastructure, and regardless of that willingness to fail, they've, despite that, been extraordinarily successful. So I think we can learn a lot from those brands. And as a lot of the major brands in the room, just be willing to take that risk and understand.
The biggest missed opportunity in the last 5 years, at a risk of not being too politically correct, I think is the traditional agency model not devolving and how it's reacted to the changes that are happening, especially in the digital landscape. Everything is different now, but some of those are still stuck in the same situations they've been in the past. Procurement departments taking over a relationship is something that continues to happen, and I think our hosts here today, Active, this is a great opportunity to say great job for you guys and taking a look at and new ways to expose clients to the best market opportunities.
I would say data in television as a whole. So I talked a bit about how we're using data to plan for linear TV, but what you didn't ask me was how is digital adapting to data TV? And some of the more interesting use cases we have right now are actually creating digital audiences from television activation that then can be used to sequential message and basically get digital and programmatic and data people excited about television. So I think it kind of works in both ways, and I think that's a big opportunity right now.
I think continue to work together with the clients and the creative agencies, and I agree to your point of the agency model needing to change. So I think if you've got multiple agencies really working to be able to get them all working together, take advantage of the technology and the changes, and making sure that your creative people understand as well, so that the creative aligns up with where the media is going and those decisions are being made in real time, that you're able to deliver the content that goes along with it. I think that's sometimes the content is lagging or isn't keeping up with the media choices and the speed in which that's changing.
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything some of the guys said here in terms of, I just feel like there's so many opportunities. It's maybe a paralyzing question in many ways, but probably for me the biggest opportunity, if I think about who I want to partner with, is who's going to help me build my foundation that I just talked about. And so a business model where I'm constantly paying you for data or repackaged media that I'm paying a premium on isn't so helpful. What I'm really interested in is how do I address that foundation I was talking about, and I think there's enormous opportunities for partners, vendors, media channels to really partner that way with their customers to help them build that foundation. And it's going to take time, investment, and to me that's the more fruitful opportunity for everybody, all in service of delivering great experiences for the consumer.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open up the floor for questions from the audience. Not everybody at once, so.
Yeah, certainly as the marketers on the panel and even in the room, do you have an example of where data really uncovered an insight that radically changed your thinking on an existing, let's say, media strategy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some great ones. One of the things that, after some visible failure in implementing or trying to implement or testing really a DMP and getting really poor match rates, expensive, wrong, cost structure. One of the things that we actually implemented the Google Marketing Platform a couple of years ago, and this is a powerful engine, like a red Ferrari, and we were kind of driving it like a bicycle. And so one of the things that we did is we actually made the connections between the DV360, SA360 to the GA360, okay? And we were actually able to run almost like a mini attribution. So if I'm thinking about acquisition, to bring you into my baby care database or my adult care database, and one of the things that we learned from that is not just what was the last touch attribution, but look more multi-touch attribution and what channels were contributing not only the cost to acquire the consumer, right? But actually, what channels did the best job of that, and what channels weren't just playing the last touch, but also assists, right? And so we were finding, a channel like Amazon, for example, was playing a really important role in those assists, and sometimes, we would have 30% of consumers converting on that day they saw the ad. Some were converting almost a month later. And we were able to make that connection. And so that was really eye-opening for us as we started to think about what role the different channels could play in acquiring consumers and doing that the most cost-effective way. Does that help? Does that answer your question? So around effectiveness of channels, where in the consumer journey and what time, was something we really learned a lot about. And therefore, what message to deliver.
For us, an example would be sort of audience modeling as we sort of started to dip our toe into those who wanted to grow cannabis on their own, or as that market started to open up. Very different audience, very different way of communicating, and so we had to do a lot of work in terms of trying to understand who that consumer is, where are they searching for information, how are they searching for information, and what is the information that they're looking for. Not typically what Scott's had done. So a lot of work was done, again, trying to find all of the attributes that were were in that marketplace. And it did radically change, let's say, our approach to search, particularly on our approach to the channels within digital in which we went and put messaging in, and the type of messaging. So it was really trying, it all started from trying to first identify what is that target audience, and then using our agency partners to help model, what is the ecosystem in which that new consumer operated in.
If I could just talk a little bit, well, I have one really cool use case where we work with an airline who wanted to actually run data-enabled scheduling to reach what they consider the business traveler. And obviously one of the unique kind of data signals for Rogers is Roam Like Home. So we know when someone's opted in, and then there's different flavors of Roam Like Home, whether you're going to go to the US or internationally. So through actually the TV activation, we were able to identify customers that actually were wireless customers that had Roam Like Home, and then we're also able to identify using regression algorithm, basically make a predictive model as to when they were going to be traveling next, using a couple of years of historical data, and then obviously that helps them understand their core audience and when to put the right messaging in front of them.
Go for it. Good. Okay. So Jason, you gave the example of Endy as a really great client-side sort of D2C data collector. Sure. They have e-commerce relationships, they have tons of data, they can probably have a really small team that can make a lot of good use of that. Right. So a lot of CPG manufacturers in this room don't have the ability to e-com and ship products to a geography like Canada.
Yeah.
So what ways can CPG manufacturers, or how can they learn from Endy?
Yeah.
And then, when you're distanced from your consumer, because there's that retailer as well, and that retailer is also pushing private label, and they are selling data to you, but they're also using it probably to enhance their own interests. So what ways can CPG manufacturers collect data in addition to social and reviews, and then how should that be managed? Some basics.
Yeah, so it is by far the most challenging vertical to work on. So for all those who are in the CPG vertical, like bravo, you guys are the real heroes in this room right now. I'll talk a little bit about what they've historically done, or at least what I've seen them do. And they bought it instead of built it. So what happens with Dollar Shave Club? Dollar Shave Club decides they're not going to charge $19 for 5 razors on one blade, and they're going to ship it directly to consumer, they're going to ship a quality product, have a ton of information. And what do you do if you're a massive CPG company? Rather than figure out the tough way to go about it, you just buy them. Like right now, it's all been through acquisition as the primary way of garnering that really rich first-party data. That's the way historically it's been. I think Therese really nailed a couple of points right now. You're going to see the advent of the LCLs of the world selling that data back to you guys during the CPG vertical. But you're right, it's absolutely for their own interest, and it's very, very expensive. I think you're going to have to be a little bit more strategic in the way that you kind of develop e-com. If you are going to develop e-com, the biggest challenge with that is scale and risk. Is it really worth it for Glenn, for example, to be shipping me a bag of manure if I live in Bradford, Ontario? Probably not. So understanding that you've got to kind of develop and push back onto the retailers. I think that's going to be the biggest kind of pendulum switch or shift that we'll see in the next 3 to 5 years, is that the CPGs are going to demand a lot more from where they're sold. Because at the end of the day, by the way, if I'm a Loblaws and my shelves are empty, I'm not going in. So you guys actually do hold a lot of power. It's just historically, we've seen it as like, we need to be in Loblaws because we have to sell there. It's Canada's largest grocery chain. That's not the case. If they don't have, your baby food to sell, or if I'm Home Depot and I don't have the #1, fertilizer and soil, like that's a big challenge for them. So understanding and beginning to ask for a little bit more, that value exchange needs to be, it's like an off-the topic. Nobody wants to discuss it. It doesn't need to be monetary anymore. You need to understand that you can begin to ask for that data because you provide a lot of value back to those retailers themselves.
I really do think the end game here is first-party data. And as you think about those data sources, I would be thinking about how do we leverage those not just to make the sale, but to acquire data. And when you can do that, I think that's really important. I think the other piece is something certainly we're thinking a lot about is what is the value exchange around gathering and acquiring that consumer data. So in CPG, a lot of it's been, okay, here's your deal, here's your coupon, or here's your sample, right? And is that really the right value exchange that's gonna, drive data acquisition? And so if you think about that a little bit differently, and I'll just give you an example, and I'll pick one out of the UK where we have a bath tissue product called Andrex, and there's a little puppy on that, brand, and that, the insight here is that the only puppy, and that is a very big brand in the UK, but what they did to acquire consumer data in the UK was they created an experience, and the insight was is the only puppy you love more than your own is the Andrex puppy, and so consumers could take a photo of their puppy, and then they would start seeing ads of their puppy on the Andrex. I mean, it was a delightful consumer experience, and well worth the consumer providing data that had nothing to do with a sample, a deal, or a coupon. And so that's what I mean by the value exchange and the experience that we're creating to enable that acquisition. I just think we need to think about it differently, and I share that example as just as the kind of thinking I think we need to be doing.
I'll take 20. No, I think that that's a great way of doing it. We work quite extensively with a lot of major CPGs, and I find that historically they've all just kind of leaned into again, what's traditionally worked in like the couponing or sampling. Like that's been great, but they don't scale relatively well. Has anyone tried to actually utilize a coupon in a grocery store that you've got digitally? No, of course not, because you got to go to a printer. How many of you have a printer in this room? That's not at work. My printer's not. Perfect. Okay, I have 3 hands raised, 3 very brave souls. But like, that's such an archaic way of doing things that you need to be a little bit more forward thinking and challenging yourself really. And each brand is going to have a different way of doing that. The way KC does that is going to be extraordinarily different than the way Scott's does it.
And I think you hit on your point. The experiential part, we've been really successful in sort of acquiring data. Again, happen to be in a category where people love to share. So as soon as you ask people, show me your biggest tomato, show me your greatest garden, it is I'll say a more pure way of getting to that data where they're giving it up voluntarily, happily, and from a monetary perspective, it doesn't cost us a dime. And I think you can find ways to engage, not to be disruptive, but to sort of go along the journey with them, with something, and we find it's really, really successful.
One of my first programs at Rogers was managing integration between Scott's and Breakfast Television, so that's near and dear to my heart. I think that we're already seeing, like, in terms of the value exchange stuff. So I think Telefonica in Spain is they've actually invented what's kind of like a data wallet, or a process where you can actually opt in to having them use your data and also third parties. So they do various things like surveys and market research for different companies, and you get a perk anytime you participate in these things. So I think that's a little bit of a lesson